My husband's jealous ex-girlfriend was determined to ruin our relationship. She gave him an ultimatum: divorce me, or she'd cancel a $5 million deal. When he refused, her rage exploded. She grabbed a belt and brutally attacked me, leaving me injured and humiliated. But we weren't going to let her win. The next morning, when she woke up, she had no idea what we had planned in revenge. My name is Lily, and I'm in my early 30s. I've always believed that life would be nothing but smooth sailing, especially after marrying Mark, the man I loved deeply. Our life together was nothing short of perfect, or so I thought. We were happy, living in a beautiful apartment in Chicago, where I owned a thriving boutique clothing store. Mark worked as a real estate developer, and his career was also doing well. We'd been married for 3 years when everything started to unravel. Mark and I had always been a team. We worked hard, supported each other's dreams, and often attended social events where he introduced me to his colleagues and business partners. I'd always felt a sense of pride being by his side, as he had worked tirelessly to build his career. Our relationship was filled with laughter, late-night talks, and shared goals. We had a rhythm, a sense of togetherness, that I thought could never be broken. But things started to change the moment I met Julia. I remember the first time I saw her. It was at one of Mark's birthday parties, a gathering of friends, colleagues, and people from his business world. I had never met Julia before, but the moment I walked into the room, I felt her eyes on me. Julia was Mark's ex-girlfriend, and I didn't know it at the time, but her presence would change my life forever. Mark introduced us as I walked into the party. "Lily, this is Julia," he said, with a tone I couldn't place. Julia was older than me, probably in her late 30s, with long, striking blonde hair and a sharp, confident look. She smiled as we shook hands, but something about her smile didn't seem genuine. There was an edge to it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, Mark and I were happy. Why should I worry about his ex-girlfriend? But as the night went on, Julia's actions started to make me uncomfortable. Every time I spoke to Mark, Julia would interrupt, making little snide comments. She was friendly, but not the kind of friendly you'd expect from someone who's genuinely happy for you. Her compliments felt laced with sarcasm, as though she was measuring me up, comparing herself to me. The moment that stood out the most to me that night was when Julia made a comment about my outfit. I had chosen a simple yet elegant black dress, one that I thought would be appropriate for the occasion. Julia, however, had no qualms about making me feel small in front of everyone. "Oh, Lily, I didn't know the library look was back in style," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. The entire table went quiet for a moment, and I could feel my face turn red. I smiled tightly, trying to brush it off, but the sting of her words stayed with me the entire night. Mark, of course, said nothing. I looked at him, expecting some sign of defense, but he remained silent. I didn't know it then, but that would be the beginning of a pattern. Julia would push, and Mark would do nothing to stop her. I tried not to let it bother me, but it did. I could tell something wasn't right. There was tension in the air, a tension I couldn't quite explain. In the weeks that followed, I started to notice Julia at more and more of our social gatherings. She was always there, lurking in the background, making veiled remarks whenever she could. Every time I saw her, she would find a way to make me feel insecure. Whether it was about my fashion choices or the way I carried myself, she always seemed to find something to criticize. I found myself becoming increasingly uncomfortable around her. I began to dread social events, not because of the people there, but because I knew Julia would be lurking, waiting for the opportunity to make me feel small. One particular evening stands out. It was a dinner party hosted by one of Mark's business partners. I was talking with a few of the wives when Julia strolled over, holding a glass of champagne. She eyed my outfit, simple, modest, and immediately made a sharp comment. "Oh, that's an interesting outfit," she said, eyeing my knee-length skirt. I didn't know the librarian look was back in style. The word stung more than I cared to admit. I had tried to keep my composure. "I think it's appropriate for a dinner party," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. Julia laughed. It was a high, sharp laugh that didn't sound kind at all. Of course you do, sweetie. Not everyone can pull off high fashion like me. I bit my tongue, holding back the urge to respond and excuse myself from the conversation. My mind was spinning. How had she gotten under my skin so easily? Why was Mark letting her get away with this? After that night, things only got worse. Julia started posting pictures on social media, many of which were from our gatherings. But she always managed to crop me out of the photos or hide my face. I saw her captions, too, thinly veiled insults about my appearance and personality. It was cruel, and I hated seeing it, but Mark did nothing. One day, I scrolled through my feed and saw a post from Julia that made my stomach drop. It was a picture of her standing next to an unflattering one of me. The caption read, "Who do you think is a better match for Mark? Vote in the comments." Most of the comments favored Julia. It felt like a punch to the gut. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. I was hurt and humiliated. This wasn't just a petty rivalry anymore. Julia was trying to tear apart my life. That night, I confronted Mark. "We need to talk about Julia," I said as he walked in. He sighed and loosened his tie, obviously already knowing what I was going to say. "What has she done now?" he asked, already looking tired. I showed him the post. His face darkened as he scrolled through the comments. "This is unacceptable," he muttered, his voice low. I nodded, my hands shaking. "I want you to tell her to stay away from us. I don't want her at our parties anymore." Mark hesitated. "Amy, I can't do that. She's the daughter of an important business partner. I can't just ban her from social events. I'd risk the entire deal." I was taken aback. "So, I'm supposed to just deal with her bullying me?" I asked, my voice rising in frustration. "Of course not," he replied, pulling me into a hug. "I'll talk to her and make it clear that her behavior isn't okay. But you have to understand, I can't cut her off completely without jeopardizing my business relationships." I pulled away, feeling the weight of his words. "What about our relationship, Mark? Doesn't that matter?" His eyes softened. "Of course it does. You're the one I love. Angela is in the past. I chose you." His words should have made me feel better, but something in the pit of my stomach told me this was just the beginning of our problems. Little did I know everything was about to spiral out of control. The weeks that followed only confirmed my worst fears. Julia's behavior didn't just continue, it escalated. Every time we attended a social event, she seemed to find new ways to make me feel small, to remind me that I wasn't welcome in her world. But the worst part was that Mark, despite his promises, did nothing to stop her. It was as if he had become paralyzed by the fear of losing his business relationships. It was breaking my heart to see him so torn, but even more so to realize that I was losing him, little by little, to this woman who clearly had no boundaries. It was a Saturday evening, and we were at another dinner party hosted by one of Mark's business colleagues. I had seen Julia the moment we walked in. As always, she was in the center of attention, laughing a little too loudly, her eyes scanning the room for anyone who would listen to her. As Mark and I mingled, I found myself talking to a few of the wives in a quieter corner of the room. But then Julia came over, champagne glass in hand, a devilish smile on her face. "Oh, Lily," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness, "that's an interesting outfit." She made a pointed gesture toward my knee-length skirt and blouse. I didn't know the librarian look was back in style. I forced a tight smile, trying not to show how much her words stung. "I think it's appropriate for a dinner party," I said, my voice trembling slightly. She laughed again, louder this time, her words cutting through the room. "Of course you do, sweetie. Not everyone can pull off high fashion like me." Her voice was sharp, mocking, and I could feel the eyes of the others in the room on me. It felt like everyone was silently watching, waiting for me to react. I excused myself quickly, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Mark, of course, was nowhere to be found. It wasn't the first time he had failed to come to my defense, and I was starting to wonder if he ever would. Weeks went by, and Julia's attacks grew more frequent, more public. She began cropping me out of photos on social media, always making sure her face was front and center. In the captions, she made subtle digs about me, my appearance, and my place in Mark's life. It was clear what she was trying to do. She wanted to ruin me, make me look small and insignificant. But what hurt the most was that Mark didn't seem to care. Then one evening, things took a turn. I was scrolling through my phone, my heart sinking with each passing post. Then I saw it, a picture of Julia standing next to a photo of me, one that was unflattering and taken at the last event. The caption read, "Who do you think is a better match for Mark? Vote in the comments." Most of the comments were in favor of Julia. It was cruel, it was humiliating, and it was one of the worst things I had ever seen. I felt my blood boil. I couldn't keep ignoring this. I had to confront Mark. He needed to understand how far Julia had gone, how much pain she was causing me. When Mark got home that night, I didn't waste any time. "Mark," I said, showing him the post. "Look at this." He sighed, rubbing his temples as he scrolled through the comments. "This is unacceptable," he muttered. I could see how upset he was, but his face was still tense, his hands shaking slightly. "I want you to tell her to stop," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "I want her out of our lives. I don't want her at our parties anymore." Mark hesitated. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes shifting uneasily. "Lily, you have to understand. Julia's the daughter of an important business partner. I can't just cut her off completely." I felt my chest tighten with panic. "So, you're telling me you're going to let her keep doing this? You're going to let her tear me apart?" "I'm not saying that," Mark said quickly, pulling me into a hug. "I'll talk to her, make it clear that she can't keep doing this. But you have to understand, if I cut her off completely, I risk losing this deal. You know how important it is to my business." The word stung. He was choosing his business over me. I pulled away from him, tears welling up in my eyes. "What about us, Mark? What about our marriage? Doesn't that matter to you?" His face softened, but there was still a hint of discomfort in his eyes. "Of course it matters. You're the one I love. But Julia, she's in the past. I chose you. I'll deal with her. I promise." But even as he said the words, I knew something wasn't right. It didn't feel like enough. And deep down, I feared that this wasn't just about Julia anymore. There was something much deeper going on, something I wasn't sure I could fix. Little did I know, things were about to get even worse. I wish I could say that things got better after Mark promised to handle Julia, but the truth is, they only got worse. I could feel the tension building between Mark and me. He was trying to balance his business dealings with Julia and his loyalty to me, but in the process, he was neglecting our marriage. Every day, I felt more like I was losing him, and Julia, with her calculated manipulations, seemed to have more power over our lives than ever before. Julia's presence at our social gatherings had become unbearable. Every event felt like an opportunity for her to take another jab at me, trying to tear me down little by little. But what really pushed me to the edge was what happened next. One night, we were at a cocktail party hosted by one of Mark's business associates. I had chosen a simple black dress, something elegant but understated. I didn't want to draw too much attention to myself. But the moment we arrived, I knew that Julia would find a way to make me feel uncomfortable. She was there, of course, in a tight red dress that seemed designed to grab all the attention. And it did. She immediately locked eyes with Mark, heading straight for him. "Mark, darling," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness, completely ignoring me. "You look absolutely stunning tonight." I could feel my heart sink as she reached for his arm, her fingers lightly brushing against his skin. "Care to dance with me?" "For old time's sake," she asked, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't place, something that made my stomach turn. Mark hesitated, but then he gently pulled his arm away, smiling politely. "Thanks, Angela, but I'm here with my wife. Maybe another time." For a moment, I thought I could breathe again. But the night didn't get any better. Julia didn't let up. She kept trying to steal Mark away from me, pulling him into conversations under the guise of discussing business, or asking for help with some imaginary problem. It was obvious what she was doing. She wanted him to herself, and she wasn't going to give up without a fight. By the end of the night, I was exhausted, emotionally and physically. But the real breaking point came later. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone when I saw it. Another post from Julia. This one was even worse than the last. It was a picture of her, looking glamorous as usual, with a photo of me from the party in the background. The caption read, "Who do you think is a better match for Mark? Vote in the comments." I could feel my blood boil as I read through the comments, many of which sided with her, praising her beauty and their perfect match. It felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy everything Mark and I had built together. I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I stormed into the kitchen, phone still in hand. When Mark walked in, I showed him the post, my hands shaking with anger. "Mark, do you see this? This is what she's doing to me. Do you even care?" He looked at the post, his face darkening with anger. But his expression quickly shifted to unease as he realized the full impact. "I'm going to talk to her," he said quietly, his voice strained. "You've said that before," I shot back, my voice rising. "And nothing ever changes. Why are you letting her control everything? Why aren't you standing up for me?" Mark's face twisted with frustration. "Lily, I'm trying to handle this. I don't want to lose this deal." But as he said it, I could see it, he wasn't just talking about the business deal anymore. He was afraid. Afraid of Julia, afraid of what she could do, and afraid of losing everything. But I was afraid, too, afraid that I was losing Mark, the person I loved, to someone who was slowly tearing our lives apart. I didn't know it then, but the next day would be the breaking point. The moment everything would change. The next day, things took a turn I never saw coming. I woke up feeling drained, like everything was starting to catch up with me. Mark's silence, Julia's relentless bullying, the constant tension in our home. I tried to push it all aside and focus on work, but the weight of the situation wouldn't leave me. It was as if the walls were closing in. Mark came to me later that afternoon with an uneasy look on his face. "Lily, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice heavy with regret. I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. "What now?" I asked, bracing myself. He hesitated before speaking. "Julia, she's threatening to cancel the $5 million real estate deal we've been working on unless I divorce you." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. "She's giving me an ultimatum, and I don't know what to do." I felt the room spin. My throat tightened as I tried to process what he had just said. "She's doing what?" I managed to ask. "She's using the deal to force me to make a choice, her or you. She says if I don't choose her, she'll walk away from the deal, and I'll lose everything." I'm so sorry, Lily." For a moment, I stood there in stunned silence. Mark was caught between the woman he had been with before me and the life we had built together. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I wanted to scream at him for letting it get this far, but I couldn't. This was it, the breaking point, the moment when everything was on the line. I didn't cry, though I wanted to. Instead, I took a deep breath. "Mark, we've been through so much together. You can't let her destroy us. You have to choose me. You have to choose us." He looked torn, his face a mixture of guilt and fear. "But this deal is everything. It's not just about the money. It's about my career. It's my future." I shook my head, the words coming out in a rush. "Your future is with me, Mark. We're partners in this life. You can't let her win. If you want to stand by me, we'll face her together." I could see the doubt in his eyes, but something in me snapped, and I knew I couldn't let him back down. We couldn't let Julia destroy what we had. "Cancel the deal, Mark. We'll figure it out. We'll be okay. But we can't let her control us any longer." Mark finally nodded, though it was clear it wasn't an easy decision for him. He picked up his phone, and with shaking hands, he called Julia. "I'm ending this deal," he said into the phone, his voice firm. "I'm choosing my wife." I held my breath as he ended the call, but before I could say anything, Mark's phone rang again. It was Julia. "You've made a huge mistake, Mark," she hissed through the phone. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure you lose everything. Your career, your life, everything you've worked for. And as for you, Lily, you'll never be good enough for him." I could hear the venom in her voice, but Mark just turned off his phone and looked at me. "It's done," he said, his face full of resolve. But it wasn't over. The next day, Julia came to our house, furious. I was alone at the time, and she stormed in, her face twisted with rage. Without warning, she grabbed a belt from the coat rack and started hitting me with it. She screamed, "I'll finish you, Lily. I'll make sure you're out of his life for good." I screamed for help, my body aching with the pain from the strikes. And just when I thought I couldn't take any more, the front door slammed open. Mark rushed in, his face full of shock and anger as he pushed Julia away from me. "Stop it," Mark shouted. "You're out of control, Angela." I was shaking, barely able to breathe from the pain and the shock. Mark grabbed me and led me to the couch, calling for help. He was frantic as he dialed 911. Soon, the police arrived and we filed a report showing them the CCTV footage that had caught everything. Julia was arrested, her face twisted in anger as they cuffed her. The legal consequences were swift. Julia was charged with assault and harassment, and her reputation, once protected by her father's wealth and influence, crumbled. She was no longer a threat to us. After everything was said and done, Mark and I took some time to heal. It was hard, but we were stronger for it. We learned what true loyalty meant. My boutique continued to thrive, and Mark's real estate business grew even stronger without the toxic weight of Julia hanging over him. We were rebuilding our life together, free from her manipulation. As for Julia, I heard rumors that her father sent her away to another state. She was cut off from the life she had tried so hard to ruin. Now, months later, as I sit here reflecting on everything that happened, I realize how much we've been through, how much we've overcome. We fought for each other, and in the end, we won. Our love is stronger than it has ever been, and we are finally free to live our lives without fear of betrayal or jealousy. Julia may have tried to tear us apart, but in the end, love and loyalty prevailed. And now we can truly move on, together.